Hello again, my dear friends. Welcome back. Come, sit with me for a while. If you were here for my last story, Kim Woo-gil and the 7 women on a forgotten Pacific island, then what I'm about to share will feel strangely familiar. The setting is almost the same. The time period is almost the same. The circumstances are heartbreakingly similar, and yet the ending could not be more different. I want to tell you about another island, another woman, and the men who surrounded her. But this time, instead of 35 people being found alive, the world would discover something far more painful. This story is difficult, but I think it's one we need to hear. June 12, 1944, a small fleet of Japanese ships came under attack from American aircraft in the Pacific. The ships went down fast. Explosions, fire, men thrown into the water. 31 survivors, sailors and soldiers, mostly in their late teens and early 20s, swam to the nearest shore. That shore belonged to Anatahan Island, a small, remote volcanic island in what is now the Northern Mariana Islands. Dense jungle, steep terrain, almost no contact with the outside world. The island was not completely empty. A Japanese plantation manager named Kikuichiro was already living there, running a small coconut farm. And with him was a young woman named Kazuko. She was 28 years old. Her husband had left the island before the war, intensified, and been unable to return. She had been waiting, and now, into her waiting, 31 strangers had arrived. Before we go further, I want you to understand something about Kazuko. The Japanese media later called her the Queen of Anatahan. That nickname has shaped the way this story is usually told, and not always kindly. But I think about her differently. She was a woman alone, surrounded by 31 men she had never met, with no way to leave and no authority to appeal to. Whatever choices she made in the years that followed, I ask you to hold them with compassion. She was not a queen. She was a person in an impossible situation, doing what she could to stay alive. She deserves that much from us. In the beginning, things were manageable. The survivors organized themselves, ate what remained on the plantation, and hunted what the jungle offered. Kikuichiro made a quiet arrangement with Kazuko. They would present themselves as husband and wife, a protective measure against the reality of 31 men, with no idea when rescue might come. For a while, it worked. There was a kind of order, a kind of peace. But peace on Anatahan would not last long. In September 1946, some of the men discovered the wreckage of a crashed American B-29 bomber in the jungle. Among the debris, 2 pistols and ammunition. I want you to think carefully about what those 2 pistols meant on that island. Before that discovery, the men were more or less equal. No single man had the power to end another's life with the pull of a finger. After those pistols were found, everything changed. Whoever held a gun held power. And power, on an island where 31 men shared one woman and dwindling resources, became the most dangerous thing in the world. The violence came slowly at first, then faster. One man stabbed Kikuichiro, the manager, who had been protecting Kazuko to death, and took her as his own. That single act broke something irreparable, because if Kikuichiro could be killed and replaced, so could the next man, and the one after him. The men began watching each other with suspicion. Alliances formed and dissolved. Small slights became enormous grievances. Who sat closer to Kazuko? Who received more food? These questions, trivial in any other setting, became matters of life and death. Of the 12 Japanese who died on Anatahan, 8 were murdered in conflicts over Kazuko. 8 men who had survived a shipwreck, swum through burning wreckage, beaten impossible odds, killed not by hunger or the elements, but by each other. And all the while, the war they were hiding from had already ended. Japan surrendered in August 1945. The Second World War was over. But when American forces came to tell them, the men didn't believe it. They thought it was a trick. They hid deeper in the jungle, made improvised weapons, and prepared for an invasion that was never coming. These men were fighting a war that no longer existed, killing each other on an island the world had largely forgotten. While back in Japan, their families were rebuilding their lives and waiting for sons who might never come home. The tragedy was not just the violence, it was the blindness, the inability to step back and see what was real. By 1950, Kazuko had had enough. She escaped the island, and the remaining survivors finally surrendered in June 1951. Out of 32 men, only 19 survived until that day. 13 were gone, most killed by the very people they had survived alongside. When the survivors returned to Japan, 1,000 people thronged the pier to greet them. Kazuko became a brief celebrity, the queen of Anatahan, the woman who had survived the impossible. But I wonder what she felt, standing on that pier. Whether she replayed the years of fear, the men who had died around her. I suspect there was very little that felt like triumph. My dear friends, I told you last time about Kim Woo-gil, how 8 people chose fairness and cooperation, built a community, and brought 27 children into the world. And now, Anatahan, 32 people, same ocean, same war, same isolation, completely different choices, completely different endings. I don't tell you this to judge the men of Anatahan harshly. They were young and frightened, and the discovery of those 2 pistols changed the chemistry of the group in ways that might have been hard for any of us to resist. But the contrast is too important to ignore. On one island, a man decided every person in his care deserved equal dignity. He set aside his own preferences and asked nothing for himself that he wasn't willing to give to others. On another island, men decided one woman was a prize to be won. That status meant everything. That another man's gain was their personal defeat. Kim Woo-gil's island produced 35 living people. Anatahan produced 13 graves. We do not live on desert islands, but we do live in families, in offices, in teams. And the same forces that destroyed Anatahan exist in every human group. The need to feel superior, the jealousy when someone else is favored, the willingness to burn everything down, rather than accept that someone else might have something we don't. The people who truly survive, in any circumstance, are the ones who find a way to say, "What I have, we share. Your well-being is part of my well-being." That is not weakness. That is the most sophisticated form of strength human beings possess. I want to end with Kazuko, because she is too often forgotten. When she returned to Japan, she discovered her husband had believed her dead and remarried. She rebuilt as best she could, told her story, wrote, tried to piece a life back together from what remained. She died in 1971. She had done nothing wrong. She had been on that island because of a war she didn't start, and spent years navigating terror until she finally found a way out. She deserved better than the story gave her. They all did. My dear friends, thank you for sitting with me through this one. Some stories aren't easy, but I believe we owe it to the people who lived through these things to look at them honestly, because in looking at them, we learn something about ourselves. We learn that the line between cooperation and destruction is not as wide as we'd like to believe. And we learn that every day, in our own small ways, we have a choice. Choose the other person. Choose the group. Choose to build rather than compete. Take good care of each other, my friends. That is always, always the answer. Good night.